Nutrition Hero Podcast. Igniting both the art and the science of functional medicine. Here's your host, Dr. Brad Watts.
Hello, Nutrition Hero family. Welcome to 2021. I'm Dr. Brad Watts, host of the Nutrition Hero Podcast. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being around and for participating in the last few years of podcasts, talking about both the art and science of functional medicine and clinical nutrition. I've enjoyed it very much. 2021 is looking up, people. It's looking up. So this podcast being recorded between the Christmas season and New Year's. And so probably going to publish this the first week of January, sometime in there. But basically, I want to give a quick recap of what we've talked about this year, and then I also want to lay out a couple of things that start your 2021 off the way it should, on the best foot forward. And part of that is going to be strategy, part of that is going to be pulling out the WEDGE protocol that we've talked about in episodes past. And then the strategy that I want to highlight is really an equation, a way of thinking about your services for your patients and where you focus the quality, right? And in order to make things affordable and accessible for people, you have to pick and choose where you put the quality. Otherwise, you're going to outprice your marketplace, which is interesting. So we're going to talk about that today. All right. By the way, I am recording this from the home studio, and so if you hear any shenanigans in the background, being a vacation week with the children, that's what you get. So welcome to the circus. All right. Today, want to just highlight a couple of things. First and foremost, the people that participated in the podcast last year. All of the guests that we had last year in 2020. This year, I guess, in 2020. I appreciate you. I appreciate you spending attention with us and giving a little bit of your knowledge and experience for free to the listeners of this podcast. That's phenomenal. It's phenomenal in a couple of ways. It's my opinion that what we do consistently echoes right into our future. Okay? Not to make this too weird for you, but what we do consistently echoes into our future. We are sending these ripples of intention and action all over at all times. And I just got to say, with these nutrition heroes that have been on the podcast, guys and gals, you're knocking it out of the park. You are impacting not just your communities, but you're impacting impactors, if that makes sense. The people that are listening to this podcast, many of them are, in fact, people that are having an impact in their community when it comes to health and healing. And for those of you that have been guests on the podcast in the last year, I appreciate you energizing and providing ammo, as it were, to these people that are laying it down on a daily basis with impact. Gotta have it. I appreciate it. I like it. You guys are doing an awesome job. So thank you for the guests that we've had in 2020. Very much appreciate you. Number two, I want to say thank you to the listeners. You guys have made this podcast fun. This podcast started a few years ago and just on an idea. And it was, well, what if we start creating a community, right, that want nothing from you, but only generates goodwill and momentum in the nutrition community? I like that, right? And to date, that mentality has been maintained. Right? It's not a pitch fest every time you come on, listen to the Nutrition Hero podcast. I want this to be a community where like-minded people can come and listen to like-minded people. And we can start to build some momentum in the marketplace, not just selling books or selling, products, etc. I like that. Right? And so I appreciate you guys for participating in that. And I hope that in some way, even if it's a small way, that Nutrition Hero Podcast and the guests that we've had are able to impact you and motivate you to keep your head in the game, number one, but also to keep energizing your communities moving towards health and healing. And so thank you for participating in listening and consuming this media. Right? So shameless plug, by the way, make sure that you are a subscriber on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, however you get your media. 5-star review, thumbs up, whatever it might be, and share it with your friends. So help us take this to the next level this year, and just getting this information out. All right. So what I want to do for the rest of the time today is I want to organize around something that I call the WEDGE. The WEDGE is a system of looking at patients that allows you to organize no matter what walks through the door, whether it be a patient that has gut issues or autoimmune disease, both, diabetes, Alzheimer's conditions, whatever it might be. I want you to have a system of analysis and application that allows you to optimally serve your patients. Now, one of the things that I find in the functional medicine marketplace is when people don't have a system, then it's just shooting from the hip on everything. We try a bunch of random stuff, and patients don't get well because we don't have a checks and balances mechanism, right? So sometimes people try to overcome not having a system by seeing the patient, every week, calling them every week or every 2 days, and so they try to overcome not having a system with attention, right? Well, you can't scale a practice if you're spending too much attention, right, on any given case, and too much attention is an interesting concept, but patients take time to heal, and if you're constantly spending attention and changing things and etc. before you give their body a chance to heal, healing doesn't happen, right? So too much attention, it's like having a kitten as a little kid and you pet it too hard, right? That kitten does not enjoy it. In fact, that kitten's going to fight you. And in the functional medicine world, there are a lot of providers that are doing that. Okay, they are too much love, right? And they're not giving their patients an opportunity to heal because they're changing things so often. Got to give them a chance to heal, right? When we look at optimizing patient outcomes, if we don't have a system and we're compensating with attention, okay, we have few patients that get a lot of attention and poor results. That's not a good equation. That's not a good mix. Like, nobody wants to eat that soup, right? That's not a good mix for a healthy functional medicine practice in the long run. I've done that, by the way. I've had that in my history as well. And so you got to change the recipe in order to get out of that mess. So I'm just telling you right off the bat, right, you got to have a system. Now, if you do have a system, but you have terrible follow-through, you are going to have some mechanisms in place that allow your patients to get better. Okay? So if you do have a system, but lack of attention, terrible follow-through, you're going to have checks and balances. It's going to have to be automated. These are the programs that you find on Instagram, right? Where you don't have a provider, you have an automation machine. And that automation machine is, sometimes they're good coaches, and usually this is where you get like personal training things, right? Where you send you the program, it's up to you to follow it, there's no coaching involved. Okay, so some patients do really well with that. Some patients don't. If you want to have a practice that's highly automated and you don't have to touch it very often, okay, so low touch frequency with the patients, highly automated, you can do that, but you have to sit down and write it out and organize it in a way and understand that you're not going to help everybody. You're going to help patients that do well and are self-motivated. Okay? And I think that's an important thing to note as well. Right? I think it's important to know who you are and what you're doing so that you have the capacity to organize consistently. So that's another style of organization. Right? And for me, my focus and really my heart is for those people that are not self-motivated, for those people that they can't find their way out of the condition they're in. And if they could, they wouldn't need my help in the first place, because there are 1,000 Instagram programs that are willing to be automated where you pay $30 a month and the emails get sent and the videos get sent, and every patient goes through the same process. Hey, that's cool though. It's a coaching process. That's cool, but that's not my style. When we look at functional medicine, clinical nutrition, really what I see our purpose as is being able to step in and help patients where patients can't get help apart from us. Right? I'm going to do something that nobody else is going to do because nobody else can. Right? And hear me when I say this to some extent. Right? I want to do something that nobody else can do. Right? And nobody else is willing to do. And the patients are going to get results that nobody else is going to get. And it's really great. Okay? So here's your equation this year. A plus B equals C. A plus B equals C. A is your care. B is the programming. Okay, so I should say A is the care provider, B is the programming, and C is the patient result. So provider, programming, result. A plus B equals C. We got to figure out how we're setting this up. Okay? If you are treating all the patients in your practice and you are a high touch, high attention provider, means you're going to have a limited number of patients that you can service because there's only 8 hours in a day. Okay? And much of that 8 hours is doing paperwork and administrative roles. Okay? So A plus B equals C. If you're a high attention, high touch provider, you can afford to have so let me put it this way. If you're an expensive provider because you're high touch, high attention, right? You can afford to have a lower intensity program, right? Because there's a high intensity coaching that goes along with it. If you're a high touch, high intensity provider, right? That's a lot of coaching skill that's going to come along with a program that does not need to be as intense in order to meet the patient goals. Okay, so what would happen in that equation is the patient spends majority of the money that they have available to spend on their health on the provider, okay, on the coaching, which means you're going to have systems in place that allow you to reach out and connect with the patient consistently, frequently, okay, so that you can scale. So most of the patient available funds will be spent on the provider in a high-touch, high-frequency provider position. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So A is, like, if I'm the one that's going to be treating patients, I'm a high-touch provider. Okay, I'm not going to talk to them every day, but the point is that I'm a high-touch provider. I want to be in communication with these people as often as I can so that I can help them get results. Okay, which means that my protocols are going to be less expensive. Why? Because my coaching is the expensive part. Okay, so A is the expensive part in my style of practice. B is a little bit less expensive, right? And C, the patient still gets great results. Now, if you're somebody that has, providers working underneath you, right, and you're basically paying them a salary or whatever it is, and you're trying to scale your practice so that you can serve as many people as you possibly can, what happens is that you want to, well, let's put it this way. That equation, A plus B equals C, provider plus program equals patient outcome, right? If you are having providers underneath you trying to scale your practice, if you're not the one spending attention on your patient, and maybe it's somebody that doesn't have the same skill set as you, maybe it's somebody that doesn't have the same attention span as you, maybe it's somebody that's just not you, okay? They don't have the package that you bring to the table. Your program is going to have to be heavier, right, as the coaching skills, problem-solving skills, decline. Does that make sense? If A is going to be lighter, then B has got to be heavier in order for patient outcome to remain the same. This is just how my head works. right? This is how I coach patients as well. This is how I coach providers. Your programming has to compensate for the lack of conflict management that your provider might have, for the lack of intensity or insight that your provider might have. Right now, obviously, we don't want to leave our providers that were, nutrition coaches, etc. We don't want to leave them where we find them. We want them to enhance their skill set as well, right? Because they become more valuable to the practice. They become more valuable to the patient. Like, it's a win-win. But understand that there's a balance here, right? So here's the other side of it, right? You get, and I've been here as well. I'm going to hire the best provider I can. I'm going to hire somebody that would basically be me to treat patients, right? And I'm going to have a good program, and the patient's going to get an even better result. Well, what happens? You tend to outprice the marketplace with that. And, pretty soon your programs are like, well into the tens of thousands of dollars, because that's what that provider's attention demands, and that's what that program demands. And now, instead of being able to help 100 people in the next year, you're only able to help 15. But maybe that's the program, that's the style of practice you want. Okay, so you got to just make sure that if you don't want to outprice your marketplace, there are some trade-offs that have to happen within that equation: provider, programming, and result. Now, if you're me, I don't want to sacrifice the result, the outcome. Don't want to do it. So if you're in a high attention situation where the provider is expensive, right, like I am, then what has to happen is there has to be mechanisms for coaching that are in play that allow the patient to still get all of the touches that they need and a quality program, right, so that they can get a quality result. So just play with that equation as it relates to your 2021 here. Play with that equation. Okay, you got to think about, what does that look like? I'm not necessarily talking about like how expensive, supplements are, right? What I'm talking about is if the coaching is not as, touch forward as like I would do for my practice and my patients, then your patients have to have a dietary manual to follow. If the coaching is not as intense on conflict resolution, like, Bob, stop eating those hot dogs, don't make me come to your house, okay, then you're going to have some sort of dietary guidelines that a patient's going to have to fill out for you, like a journal. If the coaching is not going to be as strict on the food programming, then you're going to have something that offsets that from a supplement perspective. Okay, maybe the patient has to live on gluten flam. Okay, maybe the patient has to live on, the double dosing of fish oil. Maybe the patient's going to have to live on Kappa Rest or Capex, right, dampening the body's inflammatory situation. If the patient has to live on those things to compensate for their lifestyle, it's because the coaching is not handling the lifestyle. So there are ways to organize this. And so don't try to overtune the program, right? And ultimately tune out your patients and the ability for them to have access to you. Okay, just understand that there's a balance that's there that you want to be able to work with. When you find that balance between provider, all right, I got my team, programming, all right, I know the type of supplements I use, how they work, etc. Okay, and we have patient outcomes, then there's got to be a system that allows them to sail in the right direction. I call that the wedge. And the WEDGE is a way that you can consistently help patients improve across the board by coaching them through lifestyle. It's plug and play, right? But the WEDGE is this. Just draw a wedge, like basically an arrow without a line. I'll include the graphic here in the show notes. But the WEDGE, right, is a way for you to coach patients. You don't get specific too quickly. You start out in general, handling inflammation, and as the patient begins to heal, your nutrition protocols become tighter and tighter, and you can adapt them. You can decrease the volume of supplements that your patient's using as they heal, right? It only makes sense. Okay, but phase 1 would be something like a de-inflammatory cycle, supporting the patient's ability to jumpstart their lifestyle, getting rid of inflammation. Okay, phase 2 will be based off of their specific laboratory intakes or their symptom check worksheets, okay, whatever the inventory is that you're using. And then here's the key. You have to either retest or recheck with the symptoms inventory. Why? Because as the patient heals, their programming is not going to demand the same supplements forever. Right? Now, if you're using like single nutrient stuff like CoQ10, fish oil, vitamin D, yes, those are probably going to be standard. Right? Why? Because they're single nutrients, they're not blends. Those are building blocks for quality physiology, for quality health that I think everybody needs to be on. But if we're talking about like herbal blends that sensitize, support the body's ability to sensitize insulin receptor sites, okay, for those patients that have insulin resistance, etc. Well, those processes tend to change as the patient's physiology changes. Right? The same way that a patient shows up on 80 units of insulin and their A1C comes crashing down as they change their lifestyle, the MD that gave them the 80 units of insulin is not going to leave them on 80 units of insulin, as long as that makes sense, that word picture. Okay? So, very cool. But the WEDGE, you start out with general protocols that get fine-tuned over time to adapt specifically to the patient and how their physiology changes. The WEDGE. If you don't use the WEDGE, what happens is you start supplementing strictly for symptoms rather than for systems. Okay? You start out in general because we want to handle inflammation. We want to handle systems. As we handle the inflammation and we handle the symptoms start to go away. So if you're using a symptoms inventory to treat your patients right now, make sure that your symptoms inventory is organized by system. Otherwise, your patient's going to be on 75 different supplements, and they're not going to have any room for food. They're not going to have any attention span for you. Your patient's not going to get better, right? And that's not optimal functional medicine. Okay? So that's like target nutrition is what I call that. You go to Target, and you say, let's look at all the labels. Here's a supplement for gas. Here's a supplement for headaches. Here's a supplement for whatever. And now all of a sudden, instead of working on an inflammation systems-driven process, you're working on a straight symptomatic process. Okay? But the WEDGE allows us to start out in general. Maybe it's biotoxin that's destroying your patient's life. Maybe it's biotoxin piling up inside their physiology, and guess what? They stink at detoxing. Right? They stink at detoxing. And so you have to support their body's ability to open up phase 1, 2, and 3 liver detox pathways. Allow them to drain biotoxin at a faster rate. Handle the exposure to biotoxin, whatever it might be. Okay? Rather than being like, oh, you got a headache? This is good for headaches. Oh, you have blurry vision? This is good for blurry vision. So inflammation is always first. Dampen the inflammation. Okay? Don't suppress it. Remove the trigger. Open up the body's ability to process it. Right? It's like having a bathtub with a plugged drain. Okay? It doesn't matter what you do until you open up that drain, right? It's not going to function appropriately. Especially if you can't shut off the water. Lifestyle. Okay? So anyway, move from general to fine-tuning. Go inflammation, systems, symptoms. Inflammation, systems, symptoms. The world's got it backwards, you guys. the world always starts out with symptoms, because that's what you can see. That's what you can hear. That's what you feel. And that's why there's so many sick people. That's how it works. So inflammation, address it. Systems, address them. Symptoms are the last fine-tuning step. Okay? So, anyway, take that into context today. A plus B equals C. Your provider plus your program has to give you a quality result. Right? And which one's heavier, provider or program? It's up to you. Right? Up to you. Follow the WEDGE. Inflammation, systems, symptoms. Always start there. Right? Your 2021 is going to be epic. Follow the process. Follow the process. If you want more information on this, let me know. You can email me. Right? Brad@biogenetics.com. Feel free to email me. All right. Blessings, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy New Year coming up. Let's make it a good one.